I love the new voice now with Zoom. It's so inviting. I apologize for the background noise that you may hear throughout. My children and dog and husband are not necessarily the quietest people. Hello, Rachel. Hopefully you're going to turn your camera on and show us your beautiful face.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. Looks like you're in your car.
I am in my car.
I love it.
Okay. Can you still hear me?
Yep.
Is that music on your end or my end?
Not on my end. Do you have an app open in the background of your phone that's playing? That's probably
Hold on
what's
a second.
happening. Or if you've like had Instagram open and you're looking at stories, it will play in the background.
It was just my music app.
Yeah.
Somehow my music app decided to come on. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. So I've kind of gave you a brief introduction before I let you into the room so they know who you are and where you're speaking from, but that's kind of all I said. And I'm happy to just kind of turn it over to you, Rachel, and you can just talk about your program and how we can access you and what information is best for our volunteers to know. So your audience is, we have 2 new staff members that are coming on with victim services. So obviously welcoming them or introducing them to your program, but also bulk of our audience right now is volunteers that are on scene and what we work hand in hand in collaboration with at the hospital when supporting domestic violence and sexual assault victims. So without further ado, the mic is yours. You're muted.
You would think I've never done this before, but I have. I'm a newbie. I was just asking, have you guys been still attending at the hospital during COVID and all of the fun stuff that we're in?
So for the first lockdown, the ministry put all of us on to just phone support only. And then when things opened up in the summer, we were back on scene. And then when we went back into our second and third lockdown, we were allowed to continue on scene. I think obviously at that point more information was known, PPE was in place. So we have been called to the hospital. I would say not as frequently as we used to be. And I think that's just precautionary measures being taken in place, but we have been allowed in.
Okay, and that's probably a little bit on us, from our program as well, just because the Sexual Assault Center, who is another partner of ours, they haven't been attending. So I guess we probably just assumed we were lumping it all together. So, okay. All right, so we'll make sure that we can sort of start to include you guys when we have those cases. So as Stella mentioned, my name is Rachel. I'm the program coordinator for the Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault program at the hospital. Were you able to pass everyone on that little pamphlet that I sent you? Not yet. Okay, cool. Good, then nobody will know that I'm reading right from it.
No, they won't even know. That will go out later.
Fantastic. So I did create like a 1-page double-sided leaflet just for everyone to have, just so you've got a basic rundown of our program and what we do. So we are mandated by the government to be available 24/7, which we do strive to make sure that we have. Unfortunately, there's been some high turnover in the last couple of years, and then especially with the pandemic, with our other nurses that are on that work throughout other areas of QHC. So we've been down to just a couple people. So we do try to be 24/7. Anyone can access our program. So generally how we are accessed is that someone will attend one of the 4 emergency departments, which is at Bancroft, Picton, Baville, and Trenton. Once they're triaged there, they are supposed to be asked, every man, woman, and child over the age of 12 is supposed to be asked if they've, are free of violence or have ever experienced violence in their past. Quinte Healthcare at the moment mostly does that for women and children 12 and over. And so they're either asked about having DV-SARP, wanting their services, or they are specifically asking for that when they come into the emergency department. So that's one way to access that. Another way is people can just contact the office. So it's either calling through switchboard and asking for DV-SARP, or we have a new number that we've just had given to us. So we now have just a very generic DV-SARP line, so that really anybody can contact us. It is a private line. We were just having some IT and phone issues, so we decided to move over to just having a nice generic line for people to access. That is on the pamphlet that you'll get from Stella later. So we try to work closely with all of our community services. So that is things like victim services, like you guys. We do utilize the Sexual Assault Center. We work closely with Three Oaks, Children's Aid, all those other community resources. Unfortunately, we are just one stop in a person's journey after being assaulted. So we don't have a social worker or anything else like that attached to us. We are strictly nursing, and our main focus is to focus on patients' medical issues and then forensic collection if that's the route they choose. So we are very fortunate to have people like you and victim services and all those other great community agencies that we can then refer patients onto and get them the further counseling and sort of things that they need. So once we have been paged and we attend to the hospital, we go through a list of options for the patient. So we see domestic violence and sexual assault, and we sort of go through the entire lifespan. So we kind of sort of say, you know, from birth to death, we'll see anybody that's been in a violent situation. So for sexual assault, we usually stick to the Sexual Assault Center for our adults, and then for domestic violence, we utilize you folks at Victim Services, and then it's sort of a toss-up between Victim Services or Children's Mental Health for children under 16. Our focus, like I said, is to medically ensure that they're okay. And so the things we can offer are, we offer protection and testing from STIs. So that the common STIs that we are looking at treatment for are gonorrhea and chlamydia. And then we do have an HIV prophylaxis, which is a 28-day regime. We offer Plan B. We offer a slew of STI testing, and then, like I said, the community resources with counseling and further on like that. So we do see both acute. So for us, acute is usually within that 7 to 12 day mark, and then non-acute. So anybody that's been assaulted over that or historical abuse, we will attend for that. We can take documentation that remains private within the patient's medical file. We do photo documentation of injuries, and then our staff is also has the extra training. So if it is a sexual assault victim and they would like to have the internal exam or, you know, a sexual assault evidence kit, we are able to complete all of that on our own. So it's, you know, we're not exposing the patient to more than one or two sort of nursing staff. And we are an all-female nursing staff at this time. So that's always helpful, not helpful, sorry, less stressful for our patients to know that it's just going to be another female practitioner in the room with them or the support person. So there's myself that's in the office right now. I'm full-time from Monday to Friday, 7:30 to 3:30, and then I have a coworker who's the current follow-up nurse, and she's there Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 7:30 to 3:30. So both of our numbers are on the pamphlet that you'll see tomorrow. And then there's just generic information that if you go to the QHC website and go down to their through the different departments, you'll be able to find a little bit more about the program, and it has links to various other community resources and things that we utilize. So Stella, do you guys go up to Bancroft, or is it mostly the 3 down here?
Bancroft is in our catchment area. We are expected to respond there.
Okay.
We do, but I would say we're not utilized all that often in Bancroft.
No, so up in Bancroft, they have Maggie's. So Maggie's resource does domestic violence and sexual assault. So I think they tend to use that more often than victim services up there. But definitely down here, we get called to
a lot of deaths in Bancroft.
Deaths. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because Maggie's wouldn't do that. I don't think.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, so we would probably utilize Maggie's before victim services up there for sure. So the one thing that I did put on the little flyer, which I didn't know whether I wanted to or not, but it says just to remember that when you're attending at the hospital, make sure that you go to the nurses station in the emerge department that you've been called to, and just identify yourself as the victim service worker and that you're here to support DV SARP. It does say do not accept any charting from the nurses staff, and that's not because I think you people are like, you're not going to take the charting, but sometimes the nursing staff gets confused as to who's nursing and who's not, and it's happened several times that they'll sort of like give our support people the person's chart, and then they don't realize that they're not giving a chart to a nursing staff. So that's why that reminder is on that little flyer, not because I expect all of you to be like, yeah, here, I can take the chart. So please don't be offended by that little reminder. It's really meant to remind the staff, because we've had such a high turnover that sometimes, and there's a lot of new staff in some of the emergency departments, that they may not recognize that you're an outside community resource and not the nursing staff. So that's pretty much the pamphlet. I think I've explained most of, so some of the other things that we can help with are, like, we do third-party anonymous reporting. So if there's been a sexual assault, we can refer that the information about the assault back to the police. They don't investigate the assault or anything about it. What they do is enter the information that we've given them into their VICLAS system, and then it will pop if more of the same type of assaults have been sent to them. And should they decide to words are hard. If the police feel like this is something worth investigating and this anonymous report sounds similar to their other report, they will come back to us and ask if the victim is willing now to come forward, that there's been more people reporting this assault. So that's kind of how that anonymous third-party report works. And then we can still offer, we offer a limited amount of transportation. So generally we are able to help transfer the patient from the hospital to their home or to the shelter or to wherever else, like from the hospital to home or wherever that is going to be at that time. And then we do offer transportation if they're coming to the hospital in Trenton for HIV PEP follow-up. So that is something that's about 4 weeks in length, and we do that for them. And if transportation is an issue, then we will send them back and forth with a cab. I think I've covered it all. It's hard to see if there's any questions on my phone, but maybe if Stella, are there any questions?
There hasn't been any there's nothing in the chat, but maybe elaborating on people can access your services and not be expected to report to police.
Yeah, so
if they can come in and.
Yeah, for sure. So within the hospitals, there are very few policies or things that we are obligated to do as nurses. One of those is not contacting the police. So the only time that we have to contact the police as a nurse is if somebody comes in with a gunshot wound, or they come in threatening that they're going to hurt themselves or someone else. So we don't make those choices for people. The same with sexual assault. It's not our choice. Everything is up to the patient. So if they want to come and talk to us and have all the information, but they don't want to involve the police, that's 100% within their control. If they do want to contact the police, then we will absolutely help facilitate that for them. And the same is with pediatric cases. So in pediatric cases, our mandate is not to contact the police, but our mandate would be to contact CAS. And then CAS would make the decision from their algorithms and their policies whether they would move forward to connecting or contacting the police about further investigation. So everything from our endpoint is completely patient driven. So we give them all of the options of what's available to them, and then we allow them to make the decisions on how they want to move forward and look after themselves.
There was a question in the chat group about hours and how to access you. I know you talked about that quickly at the beginning, but especially because there's so many different hospitals that people can report to. So how does, maybe just go into a little bit more depth in regards to that?
Yeah, so at the moment, what's happening is if someone attends to the hospital and there's someone on call, that on-call person is contacted. That is 24/7. So it doesn't matter what time someone attends to the hospital. If there's a person on call, that on-call person will be called and they'll attend to the hospital for that patient then and there. Sometimes we will talk to the patient and find out, you know, did you come to the hospital tonight to be seen specifically for a sexual assault or domestic violence? And if that's the case, do you want to speak to me tonight? And we can certainly arrange that. Or is this something that you're saying yes to that's happened in the past? And, you know, do you want to wait? And we will contact them during business hours the next day, or, you know, the next time we're business hours. But if there's nobody on call, then what's typically happening is we developed a referral. So the patient can have a referral put in, and then next business day, we will contact them and follow up with them. So there's not a whole lot of things that we can do for patients that have experienced violence or sexual assault sort of in the past, or, you know, beyond that 2 weeks kind of mark. So sometimes, you know, do we want to come in and see a patient at 3 o'clock in the morning if they've come into the emergency department for a different reason, but said yes, that they've been a victim of abuse? So that's why if we can talk to the patient, we will sort of have that discussion with them. But if it's an acute case, yeah, and there's someone on, we will absolutely see that patient then and there in the hospital. And we're hoping to get better so that once we've got more staff, we can be able to say we're 24/7. So it's kind of hit and miss. So if anybody's been assaulted and they want to go to the hospital, the best recommendation is to go to the hospital and find out if there's someone on call. The one thing that I didn't add to this little flyer, which I'll have to email you tomorrow, Stella, is there is a navigation line that the Sexual Assault Network set up at the start of COVID. And essentially what it does, it's a 1-800 number that someone can call if there's no one on call in the hospital in their area. And then that navigation line will, with a little bit of information, be able to tell them where the closest center is that has an SADV nurse on call if they decide that they want to go to be seen at the hospital that night. So there's lots of options and different ways that they can access us. But like I said, during, you know, 24/7, come to the hospital. If you've got someone and you want to call during office hours, you're certainly more than welcome to call the office directly. So that would be through the Belleville number and then our extension. Or you can also call switchboard and ask for the DV SARP nurse on call. So there's multiple ways to get to us. It's not just one way or the other. And it doesn't have to be, we don't have to be referred by a doctor or anything like that. It's self-referral. Or if you've got someone sitting in the office with you who's disclosing that they've had a history of something, you're more than welcome to give us a call, and we can sit and chat with that person, whenever.
I'll ask you to elaborate maybe a bit on the time frames, like of when you can provide the kit and when it's kind of outside of your realm.
Yeah, so when it's difficult because there's variation. So depending on the type of sexual assault, we have either 24 hours, 3 days, or 12 days. So if there was just an oral assault, that can only, the DNA evidence from that can only be collected within 24 hours. If there was an anal assault, that DNA can only be collected within 3 days. And if it was a vaginal assault, that DNA can potentially be collected up to 12 days. Sooner is better than later. But the kit doesn't necessarily, isn't going to tell us whether someone is specifically 100% was assaulted or not. What the kit does is allows us to take potential areas and swab them for DNA. But just because we swab doesn't necessarily mean 100% we're going to find DNA. But lack of evidence doesn't mean that nothing happened, right? So the police, that's just a small portion of the police investigation. One thing to note is if you don't involve the police and you have no desire to ever involve the police, then there's no point in doing a sexual assault evidence kit. Those kits are not tested unless the police are directly involved, and then it becomes up to the police to decide whether a kit gets tested or not. Now, there's some varying thoughts. Some officers will submit the kit and parts of the kit before they've sort of really completed their investigation, while other officers will sort of start and complete part of their investigation and then decide whether they're going to go forward with the kit. So you don't have to have a kit done in order to have police involvement, which is sometimes kind of misled. People think that if you don't have a kit done, then the police won't do anything. So we often see sexual assault victims who say, I went to the police department, they told me to come and I have to get a kit done. And we just remind them again that that's not 100%. They don't have to have a kit in order to make a complaint to the police department, that they can still go through with making the complaint and not do the kit. So the kit can take several hours. So for new people, it can take up to 4 or 5 hours to do a complete kit. For those of us that are a little more seasoned, we can usually get a kit done in about 2 hours. So it varies on, how long the hospital stay is, how long the person has that can give us their time and that sort of thing. Same idea with the domestic violence patients. We can talk about we go through some things, doing a very basic risk assessment regarding their relationship and safety planning. And then if we need to, then we will take photographic evidence of any injuries that may be as well. But again, they don't necessarily have to disclose any of that information to us. We're really there to help them. We give them all the choices, and then we let them decide what they want to do and how they want to proceed. Does that make sense?
Yep. Is there a length of time that you'll hold the kits for? So if someone isn't quite sure of police, like whether they want to go through with charges, but want to get the kit done?
Right. So the kits say that we'll hold them for 6 months. Okay. But there's been some debate from the Crown attorneys within the sexual assault network, and they didn't think that that was a good choice to destroy kits after 6 months. And so really at the moment, we at Quinny Healthcare, all of our kits and evidence is stored in Trenton, and we have significant space at the moment. So we've decided that we are going to keep our kits as long as we've got space in our cupboards. So once the cupboards are full, as we start to need more space, we'll just kind of go one by one and kind of take the kits out. So right now we're kind of holding them indefinitely. But the kits say 6 months. Some hospitals across the province are sticking to that. They're still destroying the kits after 6 months. But for us, we're going to keep them as long as we can.
So that choice is definitely unique to each hospital, how long they're keeping them. Just because we do deal with Kingston General as well.
Yeah, and you know what? I would have said maybe 5 or 6 years ago that no, most places were destroying them after 6 months. A lot of places are limited because of space.
Right.
So when I first started, we used to keep, the kits were big and they all got frozen. So we had a freezer at all 4 of our hospital sites. We are unique as well in that we are one of the hospitals that have multiple sites within our corporation. So lots of teams across the province, the patient goes to the hospital, whereas we will go to the hospital that the patient attends to. So we had multiple freezers. Now we're just down to 1 location. The kits are half the sizes that they used to be. And now some parts are frozen and some parts are stored in a dry cupboard and some parts are in a fridge. So it really is dependent on each center that you go to, but that should be something that is discussed with the patient, so they're fully aware of what's happening with their kits.
Awesome. Does anyone else have any questions? I've thrown some tricky ones at you, Rachel, so thank you for...
No, it's good, because it's always good to have somebody else ask something, because I'm like, I know I'd forget something, so that's good.
Right.
Well, you can always reach out to us. Our mine and Emery's, our emails are on the website, so if you've got a question or you want to ask something, you're more than welcome to shoot us off an email as well.
I think we have one question. Rachael wants to ask something.
I just wanted to know, so if we had a client and we brought them to Emerge and there wasn't a sane nurse on call, would they direct us to go to another hospital if the person wanted to just get it over and done with right there and then, as opposed to?
So they should. If the person really wants to get it done that day, the triage nurse, they have the information for the navigation line, but that is something that I will make sure to send Stella tomorrow. That's something that you can, if you're with the patient, you can always advocate that for the patient as well, that if the nurse doesn't give them a recommendation to go somewhere else, that they could call the navigation line and see if anyone else is available. So the other places would be like Kingston and Peterborough. They're sort of the 2 closest hospitals that we have. The other thing that the triage nurse could do is find out when the next on-call person is going to be. So if you come in at like 3 o'clock this morning and there's no one on call right now, but there's going to be someone on at 7:30, if they're, I appreciate that they want to get it done right then and there, but if they're willing and able to wait that 3 hours, they might choose to wait that, or 4 hours, they may choose to wait that 4 hours, and then we can be involved sort of first thing the next morning. But definitely if somebody is like, no, I want to do it now and there's no one around, I'm all for people going to wherever they can go to be seen as soon as possible.
Yeah, because in my experience, people they want to shower, they just want to get out of the clothes, and it's like they just want to be done with the whole process. So that's helpful if you know that you can bring them to, Oshawa or Peterborough or Kingston or wherever we need to take them.
Yeah.
But you're right. If somebody's coming in 2 hours, then, we might be able to sort of hold out for those 2 hours. But yeah, it's just something that people just want to get out of those clothes. They just want to get out. They want to shower. They just want to.
Yeah. So we do swabs of outside things. So you know, we would swab the chest. Things that we swab are if anywhere that someone was licked or kissed, if someone, and oftentimes in a sexual assault specifically, if someone doesn't remember what happened, we do what is called blind swabs. So we swab kind of in this back behind area from sort of the ear down to the neck and the breast. Those are the two most common areas that are either licked, kissed, or bit during a sexual assault. The other places that we swab are the rectum and the external genitalia and the vagina and the mouth. So if somebody wants to shower, they're not going to potentially destroy every single thing if they shower, right? So we wouldn't, you know, if someone wants to come in and be seen, I wouldn't tell them like absolutely do not shower, which unfortunately does happen. But we have people come in 2, 3, 5 days later who did shower. And we are limited in what we can collect, but where we're most likely to get most of the potential DNA evidence is going to be from the rectum or from the vagina, and having a shower isn't going to really ruin that too much. You know, the reason we can go 12 days for vaginal is if there is secretions left in the vaginal canal, gravity is going to slowly have that sort of come and leave the body bit by bit. So we're still able to do external genital swabs, and we're still able to do vaginal swabs. So if somebody, you know, isn't able to see us right away and they don't really want to travel to Kingston, they don't really want to travel to Peterborough, they just really want to go home and have a shower, I wouldn't tell someone, no, don't go and have a shower. In terms of the clothing, if they just want to go home and change, the two biggest pieces of articles of clothing, which is the most significant, would be the piece of clothing that's directly against their genital area. So whether that's underwear or a pair of jeans or a pair of leggings, right? And then a bra, anything that sort of touches the breast. So whether that's a bra or a tank top or you know, a sweater, right? So if they want to go home and change and shower, I would let them do that. What I would suggest is that they just take those clothes and put them in a paper bag, or if they don't even have a paper bag, just put them in a plastic bag, and we can take that as part of our collection when we get to see them, right? So I wouldn't want somebody, if they're not willing or not able to travel, want to go home and shower and change, that'd be okay. Okay. Police often
you dispelled a lot of myths, so thank you there, because I didn't know that.
No problem. Yeah. The other important thing to remember is that. Oh, am I cutting? So I just want to let patients know that they won't get that clothing back, right? So oftentimes we have patients who don't want to give us their clothes, like their outside clothing. So if they just want to give us their underwear, we'll take that. If they don't want to give us their jeans or, you know, their Lululemon leggings, that's fine. My biggest concern when I collect clothing from a survivor are the clothing that was directly against their skin, sort of prior to, during, directly after the assault.
So just in the interest of time, Rachel, we have to let you go. We have someone in the waiting room ready for the next presenter.
I know. I guess I can talk a little more than I thought.
Yeah. Well, when you get into conversation and questions, it's not hard.
Yeah. All right.
But thank you, Rachel, for your time.
Thank you, everyone. No problem. Take care, guys. Okay, bye-bye.
So next up is Sue Weir, and as I said, she's from Lennox and Addington Interval House. So our Interval House is located in Napanee, but all of it's Lennox and Addington. It used to be Napanee Interval House, but so when you're supporting clients on the east end of our catchment area, that's where domestic violence clients are going to be looking for some shelter. They also, I'll let Sue explain it, but they also assist Ontario Works with housing homeless people or people that are without accommodations. So that can get a bit confusing when you're trying to navigate accommodations for folks, but she will be very good at explaining that. So I'm just going to let her in. Hello, Sue. We are ready for you.
Excellent. Just takes me to, now I have to get all my technology in order.
Yeah.
Second. There we go. Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you for. Oh, go ahead, Stella.
I was just going to say I introduced you before I admitted you, so
Perfect.
you are free to take the wheel.
Okay. I was just going to run with it anyway, so that worked out perfectly.
Perfect.
So as Stella probably told you, I'm the director of Interval House here in Napanee, and I'm just going to give you a little lay of the land of kind of the things we do in terms of the agency. The agency itself, at its, I guess, very core, is an 18-bed emergency shelter for women and kids who are fleeing domestic violence. And in terms of the definition of domestic violence, it generally means violence within your home. We do have some, sometimes some odd requests that we can accommodate, and sometimes we don't. In terms of space, because really for us, admission to shelter has something to do with the risk you're at and something to do with what we have in terms of availability of space. So it's not a really perfect straight line in terms of people coming into the shelter, but it's always worth giving a call to find out. In addition to the 18 beds of shelter we also have 18 units of second stage housing. So we have 12 units of communal living space, which is shared accommodation across 2 sites. And then we have a 6-bedroom apartment building. And that's for women and kids. And actually we're just getting close to the finishing touches. I was there today. It doesn't look quite as close as I thought it might be, to a 6-unit, 8-person capacity youth housing site. So that will be kind of a new addition, but something we hope will be really beneficial to community and being able to provide some local solutions to kids who need supportive housing. So for us, the definition of youth is a bit of a stretch for me because I didn't realize you were young for so long. I wasted lots of my youth. The definition for our program is between 16 and 29. So kind of the broader end. And actually it means for us, we've done lots of youth work before because we have lots of young women in our programs who certainly by the time they're 25, may have been in a long-term relationship and have 2 children. So it'll be interesting to see how we sort that out. In terms of the youth program, it will also be, for the first time in our agency's history, non-gender specific. So it will be male and female youth in the program. So hopefully that'll go smoothly. We're just finishing the construction phase of that. So in terms of other things we do, just to add some more chaos, we offer outreach counseling and support. So we have regular kind of, I want to say regular business day counseling support for people who are looking for direction and who may be in relationships still, may not be, maybe long past living in that relationship, but are still recovering from the trauma. So we do that work as well. We also have a program for kids who've witnessed violence in their home. And that program is predominantly group, but because we're in a rural community, lots of times groups takes a bit of time to get enough volume to have a group together. So those kids are then maintained individually until groups are ready. And we also have a 24-hour crisis line, which is, here's a little tip. I discovered this actually from a comment from mental health. The person that runs the crisis line is the same person who's working in the shelter. And I feel like mental health was doing an intake and they were like, oh my God, and the staff answered their personal cell phone. I was like, oh, no, the staff either were talking to one of the residents who came to the door, because of course, when you're the only staff on and they have a question, they come to the door and, may interrupt the flow of the conversation that you're having on the phone. And we have a crisis line and an in-watch line, and sometimes they both come in at the same time. So the one person that's on the desk may be dealing with the live bodies that are in the shelter and also dealing with potentially 2 crisis lines coming in at the same time. So it is a little bit challenging sometimes around those issues. It's not something that, the 3 of those things collide together very often, but I think sometimes there's some sense that the person who's answering the phone just literally is sitting, and there are crisis lines in the world that not many that operate in rural Ontario, but that person is just sitting at their desk waiting for that crisis line to ring. Not so much the case here. So that is kind of one of the things to bear in mind if you call in, that, sometimes it's a little bit of a chaotic flow depending on what's going on in the house, because sometimes our folks in this facility also have lots of complicated needs, because one of the things that isn't actually a barrier to accessing services in our agency is substance use and mental health and developmental issues. So we have some folks who have some pretty significant complex needs in addition to needing safety at the shelter. So it can be an interesting environment for sure. And in terms of the other thing we do, which might be relevant as people are dealing with folks in crisis and community, like you folks might be doing, is we do emergency hotel stays for the county in the after hours, which is probably when most of the stuff that happens through victim services may happen. So after 4:30 during the week and on the weekends, we provide emergency hotel accommodation to folks, and we've done some interesting things over the years in terms of that. I feel like at one point had I think it was probably even victim services came across an elderly woman who was driving the wrong way on the highway, and her family was coming the next day to pick her up. She probably shouldn't have been driving. I think she might have had advanced dementia, but thought she was still driving, didn't realize the 401 went, like she got on the ramp the wrong way. So that woman, actually, we didn't put her up in an emergency hotel. We actually brought her in the shelter because she had a victim services volunteer with her, and the volunteer's like, not really crazy about staying in a hotel room alone with this woman who I've never met. So they actually came in, and I think the victim services volunteer stayed just up with the night staff because we're a 24-hour wake facility, so our staff are awake in the nighttime. And the woman slept in the accessible bedroom in the shelter. So there are some good potential in terms of things that get sorted out at 3 a.m. I think that's actually how we ended up with the emergency hotel program, because one of the things that most people don't encounter is a need for emergency housing before 4:30. Most of that stuff tends to be an 8, 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night sort of event. If there's a car broken down, if there's an accident involved, that doesn't usually happen during business hours. So we needed to have capacity in the community to have some, ability to call somebody at 11 o'clock at night or whatever time. So that was how we got, I'm not sure, I'm trying to find a nice word, how we got roped into doing that little project. And we've been doing it for about 20-ish years. But it means to say, if you're working and you come across someone who needs an emergency hotel stay, you're likely going to call the shelter here, and then the shelter will call out to the hotels who we have some kind of funding and booking arrangements with to see what's available. Probably the biggest hurdle in that, and it isn't always something victim services runs into, but if it's somebody who's had maybe not the greatest of stays in some of our community hotels, then we kind of have to figure out a work back if they're not eligible because they've had some negative interactions with the hotels. And Mahoney, as people may know, really don't have a plethora of hotels. We have 4 or 5, and if you've had some problems, it is conceivable that you actually can access a hotel, and then we would work to try and figure out if we could get that person into Grace Inn or into in from the cold, someplace kind of in a more of a shelter setting. So that is another little piece of the work we do. One thing, just in terms of calling, you're always welcome to call. I think, and I say this regardless of who I'm presenting to, if you have a question that you're not sure the answer of about, how to help or what might be helpful or what options are, say we do have a staff person who answers the phone 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Not the same staff person, I'd be happy to know. But really have, some good opportunities to brainstorm, because sometimes you come across something and you're like, I don't actually know what we should do here, right? It doesn't seem like it's necessarily a police issue. It doesn't seem like it's maybe mental health. I don't know how to be helpful. And I think just being able to call and say, here's this scenario, because sometimes people aren't always open to help, or they're not in a place where they're able to receive help in terms of, being ready to make a different decision. And just having someone to bounce that off of and say, what, are there any other options? Is there anything else you could think we could do? We do lots of middle of the night. That's actually why we work so, I think, closely with police, because, as I say, in the middle of the night, we're the only people who are actually open and available. So again, we've done lots of sort of creative solutions, and say, even like the woman, as I was saying, who had dementia and who was on the wrong way on the 401. That probably wasn't really our agency's mandate, but certainly if we can help out, we do try and help out. One interesting thing, and we run into this with lots of service providers, is sometimes we'll get a call to say, do you have a bed available? And strangely enough, we never tell service providers or whoever's calling, family, friends, the status of beds, because we offer beds to the woman. We don't offer beds kind of in the broader sense, because quite often, especially in situations where people perceive that there's a violent threat or that there's a concern for safety, they really, really, really want the woman and the kids or no kids to come into shelter, and sometimes they're not ready to do that. So by disclosing whether there's actually a bed that they could access really creates an unfair leverage for the woman. So we really want that to be the woman's decision. And if by chance there wasn't a bed available, because with COVID that's impacted in terms of the number of people we take into the facility, strangely enough in the violence against women system, we really try and figure that out. So if you showed up here with a woman and we didn't have space, but she was interested in coming to shelter and she met the mandate and she, this was something she wanted to do, but we couldn't accommodate her space wise, we would start to call out to the outlying shelters from where we are. So we would call to Belleville, we would call to Kingston. If they didn't have space, we called to Brockville, we called, to Carlton Place until we could find a space, and then we figure out how to get the woman there. So it's a little bit less relevant as to, because I know people don't always want to say, well, you could go there, I called there and there's a bed, and that seems like a helpful thing, but it's a kind of a little bit of a weird way our system works, is that we don't disclose that before people call us to say, this is my intent and I want to come in. And that's more about respecting a woman's autonomy and her capacity to decide whether that's right for her. And it also is really something to do with safety as well, because quite often women can assess their own safety better than an onlooker can. And by onlooker, I mean every other person but that woman. And sometimes it's not safe for her to come in because either she's maybe not ready to leave long term, so she knows if she leaves and goes back, that increases the risk of a volatile violent act, or maybe she's managing the violence by being present in the home, particularly if there's kids involved. So we really do try to make sure that they have the opportunity to make that decision. So that's just a little bit of a weird quirk that people are like, oh, I called there and they wouldn't tell me if there was space. And it's like, it wasn't you personally. We wouldn't tell anybody if there was space. So it's just a different way, because I think quite often if you're calling for availability of service, you say, is there room in a group for this person? And they say yes or no, depending on the clinician. But in the VAW shelter system, we really try to make sure that it's the woman's will, because I've been here quite a long time. And one of the things we used to call it, we have a new convenience store in Napanee, Circle K, but we used to call it was Max Milk, and we called it the Max Milk admission, because a woman would come with a provider, or a friend or a neighbor, and they come in and say, Mary's my pseudonym all the time. Mary needs to come in the shelter. So they come in and they do a little preliminary discussion with the woman in the intake office, and the woman's, oh yeah, I want to be here. And so we offer the bed space. And then as soon as the support person or the person who was with that woman left, the woman would be like, oh, I just need to go to Max Milk and get a pack of smokes or a bottle of pop or whatever. And they would be gone and we're like, huh. So we call those the Max Milk admissions, because they're really well intended. Like the people who came with that woman really, really wanted her to leave that situation, but she really, really wasn't ready. So we do try and make sure we don't put women in that situation in terms of, because it's really hard to say to somebody, I know you're concerned about me, but I'm not interested in doing that. So they come in and they kind of go through all these hoops, and then they're like, oh, I feel like that'll be the last time we'll see her. She's not coming back to sleep here tonight. And lo and behold, it has happened a lot of times. So again, it's just really balancing kind of because it does feel a bit frantic. Like when you find out that someone's in danger, you're like, oh my God, I really want to get this person out of that situation, and fair enough. But it really is one of those things sometimes where you have to sit on your hands and go, okay, you know what, I just have to wait. I can make the offer, I can help with numbers, I can try and, navigate those waters for her, but until she decides it's her time, then it's really all for naught. So it's just one of those things that sometimes we have to, and we quite often get women in here, and I say this all the time, if I was allowed to make all the choices for all the women in here, we'd be out of business 20 years ago. Not allowed. So it's really kind of system-wide. It's not just one particular circumstance. So I don't know if people have questions. Stella didn't really give me the format. I don't know if there's a question and answer period, or whether you just get to listen to me go on and on.
Well, I know you'd be a good speaker and could go on and on and on if we let you, but it's very informal.
Right.
One of the questions I do have for you is, how is COVID kind of impacting who you accept? Are you, like, I've run into supporting people that are like from out of region, and situation unfolds on the 401, and then I've had some run-ins where shelters aren't accepting people because they're from Brampton or Toronto or Like, so what's kind of some circumstances or information you could provide around that?
Well, we certainly can. And here's a little kind of, if I would say, in terms of the VAW system, all the shelters are independently operated and have very different service philosophies. And so I'm certainly not speaking for my sister shelters on either side of us. We do take people from out of the region. Our shelter to the east does not. I actually had a little brawl with the shelter to the east of us because we're in the same public health region. I'm like, you know, the KFLA, we're the LA part of that. So I'm not really sure that we're out of your region. So I know some of the shelters are being very specific around that. One of the things we've really not been able to do too much during COVID is accept women who are looking for shelter predominantly because they're homeless. Because there is some risk to being homeless, but one of the things that had to change with COVID is we can't co-locate people in the same room. And we actually, if anybody's ever been in our shelter, but we have one really big bedroom. We have 5 bedrooms, but we have one really big bedroom, and we have lots of single women in non-COVID times. We might have 4 or 5 women sharing that room. We've also have moms with 7 kids that have been in that room, but it's when we have lots of singles, that's the room we use, and then we're able to use the other 4 bedrooms for families. So during COVID, we literally, we can have, if people have been here for 2 weeks, they become a cohort, just like the schools, and they can share a room, but they still need to have physical distance in that space. So in that big giant bedroom, we can put 2 women who have been here each for, like, they've been here together for 2 weeks, all told. So it's really hard in terms of occupancy. So we really have limited the number of homeless that we've been open to. So that's been one of the COVID changes. That it's not ideal because there's certainly such a correlation for women being precariously housed and housed in terrible circumstance and homeless to domestic violence. Like, lots of the roots and the origin of women being homeless has to do with domestic violence and not being safe where they're living. So we've always had really loose parameters around that, but during COVID, because we've had to prioritize just ensuring that there's for folks who are literally fleeing for safety today, that we have space for them. So that's impacted us, but we do take out a region. I know the shelters in the area aren't doing that as much, but we are still doing it. Now, I think early on we did have a discussion, which was interesting because I think everybody was just trying to figure out what they were doing. One of the shelters, I want to say, it was in the GTA anyway. They didn't think they could have women in the shelter and physically distanced. And there was lots of things we had to figure out. There's lots of plexiglass at the shelter, which there never was before. There's lots of, everybody in the common areas is masked. Everybody's, again, partitioned off, which is weird for us, but we've certainly gotten used to it. But in those early days, some of the shelters felt they couldn't have women in the facility. So they were trying, oh, can you take 6 women from the GTA? And I'm like, because they can't have those 6 women. They probably have a 10-bedroom house. They could figure that out. Like, we can't take everybody's overflow because they can't do the work, because it really was lots of even figuring out like scheduling in the kitchen. So in non-COVID times, people live here communally and cooperatively in a really different way in terms of cooking meals together and sharing meals and being in the kitchen together and being in the dining room together and watching movies in the living room. And that's the other thing I should say about the shelter. The shelter is very, very much just like a big old home. It's not kind of the Yonge Street downtown Mission rows of cots kind of place. But during COVID, like, we can only have one family in the kitchen. So that family goes in and they do what they do. And the staff go in and disinfect. And then the next family goes in and they have their half-hour slot. So there's been lots of shuffling and juggling and trying to figure out how we can, how you can have the playroom for this hour and you can have the living room for that hour, which is really not normally the way we operate. Like, normally, as I say, the women are together and they're, let's say, breaking bread together and they're cooking together and they're watching a movie together. And so it's been a bit weird that way in terms of ensuring that people have capacity to be physically distanced from each other. But it's also affected the number of people we can have in the shelter. And actually, right as we speak, we're reconfiguring the back of the shelter to have 4 single bedrooms, which might not seem like the worst plan going forward, because I'll tell you, if you've ever wanted to coordinate 5 people who've never met each other and are all sharing a bedroom, it's not ideal. So one of the good lasting impacts for us is that we're going to have these 4 What I think will be mostly single bedrooms. I think 2 of the bedrooms when we get it's actually my old office. I just moved into this space. But when we get the 4 done, I think 2 of them will be big enough probably to have a bed and a crib. So we might have a mom and a babe in there, but otherwise we'll have single women in there. So they'll be able to have their own private space, which will be nice because as I say, we ideally like that, but it doesn't happen all the time because we have 18 beds and 5 bedrooms. So the math on that isn't perfect. So we will have 18 beds and 8 bedrooms. So that will be a good thing. So that's been one of the, if there's a silver lining positive to do with COVID. And even in terms of our operation, we're still mostly face-to-face. We do remote work with women, but we still, of course, we have all the folks in our transitional housing program who we've had to provide support for, and we see them live and in person all the time, and we see the people in the shelter live and in person all the time. So we're, again, another place that's forward-facing, have our doors open. So that hasn't changed as a result of COVID.
Good long answer, Sue.
Oh, they actually, I was on a meeting once and somebody said, I actually fed you that question so you could just give me the yes or no answer. And I'm like, oh, you should have held up a card and told me that was all you wanted. I could have just given you the yes or no. Just kidding.
Does anyone else have any questions for Sue?
And if anybody, I will offer this, if anybody wants to see the shelter, because one of the things, we have a public address, right, which is a weird thing. We're at 174 Center. And it's a hangover from the fight that it was to get the zoning changed to have the shelter here. And the fact it's a small town. So back when the shelter was being established, one of the things that happened was, there was a little bit of NIMBY and people were concerned for their safety. They thought, oh my God, you're going to put a violence against women shelter in my neighborhood and I'm going to get shot in my backyard by somebody's angry partner. In the almost 30 years we've been open, the neighbors have come to realize that's actually not what's going to happen. And we're going to have, lovely neighbors. Stella, you have a nice kitty. Lovely neighbors. We're good neighbors. We don't have too many people show up. And if we do have a partner show up, the police generally come and haul them out. So, it's not what they had imagined. But at the end of that, everybody knew where the shelter was because it was all over the newspaper and there was no MB hearing. And, so it's certainly not, we're not in a secret location, but it's also really been helpful in terms of women in communities saying, you know what, I walked by here all the time. I knew where you were. We have a beautiful play structure funded by the Ministry of Community Social Services when pressure treated lumber became poisonous and we couldn't have it anymore. Anyways, and you can see it through the fence. And, they say, I could hear kids playing in the backyard and I could see, that there were people sitting at a picnic table and I realized, I'll be okay there. And I think there's something really reassuring for people to have a visual sense of what the location is like. So if you folks, felt like you wanted to have a little look through, we would be certainly, and we do this with other, in terms of service providers, it really is reassuring. I've been there. It's a big old house. It's shared space. It's not a scary facility. Like it's not an institution. And I think most of the time in the building, there isn't a sense that this is like a lockdown ward somewhere. So I think it's something we're always interested in doing in terms of people having a good sense of what it would be like to walk through the door, because it helps reassure the people who are in, when you guys are dealing with some great crisis. So, and we also have the other thing in terms of kind of people in crisis. We have all sorts of things in this building. It's a big old house, right? But it has a god-awful basement that we use for all sorts of donations. So I think Stella and I have talked before, there's been a fire or something. We sometimes have stuff that you can't find somewhere on a weekend that you're welcome to call and see if we have what we have, because we're mostly always trying to figure out if we can help out. So that's something to think about if you come across a situation where you're like, oh my gosh, this person is broke down the side of the road and it's February and they left their coat and the car's on the 401 and they've been brought back to town, but they don't have a coat, they don't have their winter, whatever they don't have. And we may or may not have it, but if we have it, we would share it with you guys.
You guys have been helpful a few times with fires recently and essential shopping only. So you can't go to Walmart and buy whatever clothing you need, or Red Cross isn't going on scene anymore. So they're giving them gift cards, but then they have to use it online to order, but then their computer was burnt up in the fire. Like just so many logistics that go into trying to get a pair of underwear for someone. And you guys have definitely came through.
Yeah, and it's so, I mean, just even having capacity to walk someone in the door and say, this is what we need. And actually, again, on the weekends, I feel like there's lots of places that aren't open that provide support to people. And lots of our community knows to come to the door and say, hey, you know what, can I get 2 rolls of toilet paper? Like, you know, like, you actually can. We're, you know, pretty open about stuff like that, because literally on a Sunday, you're not finding any other providers around. So we're mostly open to do that stuff. So
The joys of being 24/7.
that's
People
right.
just
Well, at least we don't have a 3-digit phone number. That's what the police
Yeah.
say. You know, we call someone, we have a 3-digit phone number. We always answer the phone. I'm like, I know. We have a really public address, and people know to come to the top of the wheelchair ramp and ring the buzzer. It's the same sort of affair. But yeah.
fabulous.
Okay.
Well, if no one has any questions, you are free to leave, Sue.
Thank you. Have a lovely rest of your training.
Yeah.
And I may see some of you folks out in the field. Take care.
Yeah, take care. I just love Sue. She's fabulous. And I think you'll hear me say this. I mean, I sit in the Napanee OPP detachment. Napanee is a very small community. And well, not really now. I mean, we have a Walmart and we have like 2 main hotels with pools. So that's like a big step. But in relation to like organizations and community service supports that are available, we don't have an abundance of those. So I find we all kind of work outside our mandate a lot of the time to try and support whomever it is we're supporting on scene or in the courts or whomever it is that needs something. Interval House, the Salvation Army, ourselves, addictions and mental health, like we all really work collaboratively together and stretch our mandates or do what we can to support folks that are coming through our agency. So Sue is a great gal to know, and her agency is fabulous.
She is fantastic.
So she is. So I'm gonna give you like 3-minute intermission. Feel free to like go walk around, stretch, do what you need to do. If you need to pee, that's what I'm gonna go do. Not that I need to announce that. I'll remember to turn my mic off while I go. And then we will reconvene, and we have 2 of our volunteers, Kim and Alisa, on, and they're going to share their best and worst calls, and we'll just kind of dive into more of the volunteer practices and tips they can share with you. So come back in like 3 minutes. You'll hear me start talking. All right. Everybody that has their cameras on is back. So we will start talking again, or I will start talking again. I don't really have a format for how the next kind of hour is going to go. So feel free to kind of interject or ask questions to myself or volunteers, but very much a lot of information sharing of on scene that we provided, and kind of expect the unexpected and what you think will happen, won't happen, and just kind of the logistics around that and how we just learn to roll with the punches. So I'm going to turn it over to Alisa first. How long have you, I don't even, are you been with us 5 years, 6 years? Longer than that?
You know what? I think I've lost count. Probably about, 5 or 6, I would say. I'd actually have to do the math on my fingers to figure out what year I took the course. It's the same year Carrie started. So whatever year she started, that was because we took our training together.
I think it is longer than 5, but not 10 yet.
Yeah, no, definitely not 10. Definitely not 10. Yeah.
So if you want to just start by sharing you've done this before, so whatever format you feel that works. I kind of give volunteers a heads up, or new recruits, that it's going to kind of be the best and worst calls, and then the conversation kind of just flows from there.
Okay. So as far as best and worst calls, I think before I get into that, I totally agree with what Stella said. Go into it expecting that you're going to the call that they told you were going to, but be prepared and just walk into it knowing that you're going to, you're just going to deal with whatever you walk into. You've got the training. You've got your team lead on the other end of the phone. You will be able to do this. You will make a difference. Even when you question whether you did or not, you will make a difference. And just don't panic. Just walk in and work through it, because you're seeing everyone at their worst possible moment, and everybody deals with that differently. So probably my worst call, as far as, and I guess it depends too on how you measure that. So worst call for me was one where I was really, I walked away wondering if I'd really made a difference. It felt like there was a lot of just waiting and kind of checking on people and moving around. And I did go and pick someone up. So it was a sudden death outside of the house. The family was notified, pregnant daughter, a son who was, had some mental health issues. So, and he had been taken to the hospital. So he was separate from everyone else at that point. So it was really, but not a lot of the family wanting to do anything. They really weren't ready for the discussion about funeral home and next steps. And as much as we're trained to give them that information, you'll know whether they're ready for it or not. Sometimes you have to leave the information with them. Sometimes, maybe 1 out of 3 people is ready to talk about that. So the best you can do is just read the room and see how it changes, spend the time with them. I was able to go and pick up the son and bring him back to the house. But really, he still didn't want to be with everybody else. But at least that gave the mom peace of mind. So although I wasn't really doing anything to hugely change what they were experiencing, it's really what they needed in the moment. But I did leave that particular call feeling as though it was just there was no closure. And driving back, it happened to have been in Napanee. Driving home, it's not about closure for me. It's about what they needed at the time. And I like to think that I gave them what they needed at the time. There was a kind of an odd experience too, just before I left, where the father, it would have been the wife's father, was talking about, money and what would they get from the government and this and that. And those calls you can get into, he wasn't my victim. He was not the person I was there to care for. He had come on scene, at the end to be there with his daughter, which was fabulous. And that's her natural caregiver, along with her mom. But, trying to, getting into that conversation with him, that's not a benefit to us. My focus needed to be still on her. Did she have what she needed? Did her daughter have what she needed? Did her son have as much as I could do for him? But again, it's kind of an odd feeling. yeah, I don't want to dwell on that, but it really, in that case, it was very unsettling because there was no concrete things that I did. Whereas I've been to other calls, a sudden death that I went to with another, one of our other volunteers, and you're really working with the people. A totally different situation, but again, totally different personalities, totally different scenario. There was a wife, the mother and an exchange student and the daughter. So working with them, and you kind of fall into a pattern too, because I was there with someone else. Our personalities are different. The family's personalities are different. So we ended up, you just kind of slide into where it works. One of the girls really responded to the volunteer I was there with, whereas the other daughter really responded to me. So we really worked them, not worked them, but we really worked with them in that manner. And the mother was trying to organize things, and she was very clear with us, which doesn't often happen. She told us very point blank, "This is what I need from you." You don't often get that at a victim site. It's you're really more going off of what you think, reading the body language, reading the cues, knowing what our training is, knowing in each scenario what that person's going to need, anticipating what type of language even they need from us. And we can do that with this family as well, and we did, but she was very, very clear. And that was fine. She did not want to be cared for. She was better. She had her own method of dealing with it. She kept very busy. She kept moving around. She needed to organize herself, and that was her method. So, as much as we both watched her, she was okay, from a making it through until her natural caregivers got there. The girls, on the other hand, needed some extra support because she needed to be able to focus on herself. So that was probably one where, it was easy to walk away and think, it doesn't matter which one we go to, it's a horrible situation. So, it's never a good call. But you really, when you're looking at it, and you still drive away and think, you replay it all in your mind. Did I do this? If I did this again, would I do it that way? Did I say the right thing? Did I do that? And you're going to second guess, but you just have to be confident that in the moment you did the right thing. It doesn't matter that it might not be exactly the same thing the next time. You really responded to what they needed. And again, take your training, and take that information, bring it back each time you go on a call. When you start to think, because we have a lot of gaps between calls sometimes too. If you work during the day, you might have more calls certain days, whatever, there could be runs of them. But when you start to think, wow, what would I do? Go back to your training, read your training again. I've got all my notes and things from my training, refresh that, and just, have a look through your brochures, just kind of refresh what you would do. I know before I go, I always have my bag ready. I'm thinking about what might I need when I'm there, and then just kind of work through those scenarios and you usually have time when you're driving there to think about what would you do, what are the things that you learned, what are the things that you might need to rely on, and you'll rely in a large part on your personal experience as well, and you're just natural, your natural compassion. There's a reason why you're volunteering. Be confident in that. So that would be my comments. Any questions?
I'm glad that you touched on that. One of the questions I was going to pose to you and Kim and Lee on the call is how to stay motivated or engaged when you go kind of months without being on call. You're giving your hours, but there's like a very long window of not being on scene, and your training was like 6 years ago. And so you kind of touched on that. So if you have anything else to add, but I know Kim and Lee can maybe add to that as well when they speak of just things or tricks that they find to feel like, again, COVID has really made it difficult to feel like you're part of a community or part of an agency when we can't actually physically get together. The fact that I'm bringing on 11 new recruits and they've never been in the same room with me or each other kind of like distance you from the associate or the organization, which is really unfortunate. Right. So things that you find that just kind of keep you engaged.
So I think that, when we do come back together, and it is, you're right, COVID has changed everything. That coming together regularly for training when we're outside of COVID is probably one of the best ways that I feel connected, because you're right, you do have gaps in the calls, and you do, at least for me, I start to second guess, am I going to remember what it is when I get there? And you will, because you'll rely on what you've learned and what you've experienced in the past. But that's where reviewing your training, just stopping to think about it is always useful. And it's actually Lee that was on the sudden death call with me. We had gone there together, so she can maybe add to that as well, because she'll have some feedback from that call too. But yeah, we share an odd experience is not the right word, but when we come together as a group, we share what we've experienced and we support each other in that manner. So even what you're doing now by coming together and talking to people in this way, although you've not been in the same room, you have a purpose for being here, and you have a shared goal, and your shared goal is to provide assistance and provide compassion and help someone get from their worst possible moment to the next moment, and to the next moment, and to the next moment, until there's someone there that they feel comfortable with to move forward. And that, our goal is to help people, and that's I think a shared goal, and I think that helps to bring us together, even though we're not face to face. Did we lose Stella?
She's muted.
Okay.
Did you like? I said frig. I'm like,
I said worse than that on a call the other day. I was not muted.
Yeah, I'm not saying that won't happen either from me. No, that's all perfect, and I'm longing for when you guys can actually be in the same room again, and we can show our appreciation for you, because I'm sick of just only sending emails requesting hours and not planning something exciting, just to bring us together and have that's what being a part of a community is about, and giving back to your community is kind of sharing some of those positive, uplifting times, not always just crime and tragic circumstance. So it definitely takes a special person to give back to the community in this capacity. So thank you to all of you.
Thank you.
I'll turn it over to Kim now, if she wants to take the ropes.
Okay,
Kim has been with us a year.
A year in August, yes. A year ago, I was looking at the dates on my notes from the speakers last year, and it was end of June. So yeah, it's just been a year. I'm probably you're gonna hear again what a lot of people have said today, which just reinforces how real it is. So I guess one of the things I thought about, I remember volunteers last year saying, the not getting the calls. And so I think that's really the mindset you go into it with, that, and your team leads will say this to you when they send you kind of text saying, so you're my volunteer, or whatever, this weekend or tonight. No call is a good thing. So that means there's been no one who's having a crisis who needs that support in some ways, even though there are probably people out there that didn't ask for it or wasn't asked for, but often we'll say that, okay, so hopefully there wasn't a terrible crisis that someone needed help for. So what you're volunteering often, and honestly, in 1 year, I've had 2 calls. So what you're volunteering often is just being the on-call time. And that's just, I think, getting your head around that's okay. And not thinking, this, and then when you have those calls, you do come up with the 2 that I had. My first one, I was with someone else, and they were both very different. One was an attempted suicide, and one was more of an elder abuse situation. And the second one, I was by myself, and the lady was by herself. The first one, there was there was other agencies there, and because it was my first call, there was another volunteer there. And I guess so in terms of best and worst, the best part of it is that I have come away both times from my calls feeling that the people I was helping just felt so grateful. And you, even though you feel like I didn't really feel like I did too much, they do feel very grateful to you. And, you know, my second one, the lady said to her daughter, I stayed there until her daughter arrived, and she said, she's just such an angel. And all I did was be there. Right. And I think what the worker from Three Oaks said today about, you are here because of what you're bringing. And so what you are bringing is that you are a caring, empathetic person. And that is what is needed in that short term. And then that caring and empathy that you have as a person that you'll bring into this, then that leads you, you just listen, and then you jump into the, okay, so what I'm hearing them is they need help with this. So I'm going to ask them about this. And then the next thing you may do is your team leads are excellent. They're always there for you. And often when, like, I mean, I'm only speaking on 2 situations, but I feel confident in this, and that my second one, my team lead is sending me into the situation with, so I can provide a hotel accommodation if this person needs that, because there was a lot of destruction in the home. And so knowing you've got that tool to go in with and offer that, but so you'll go in and just being there. And the second situation, this lady the police had left, and this lady didn't even want to open her door because she was afraid, and she's had such a horrendous day. I had my badge with me, and I was able to persist and say, and then she, you know, it was very simple little things like helping her be able to talk to the hospital where her family member had gone, and give them some information, because the phone was destroyed, so her phone wasn't working. So I had a cell phone. And so it's, you don't even anticipate how simple the tasks may be that you can help with, but just being there and making that connection, and you'll just figure it out. And I think that's like, oh, am I going to be able to handle this? But you will, because you're doing this because you care about people. And that the number of times in your training when you hear just listen, that is the most important thing. Listen and being the empathy. And I guess the sadness for me, you know, is the particular crisis situation, and feeling that I wonder how things got resolved, because just once again, coming to terms with it, you're there for a short term. But it is really important, and I always tell myself to remember, so just make sure you ask, would they like the volunteer follow-up from crisis intervention, so that you know then there is going to be someone calling them and checking to see if there are any other services that they can put in place. And your role will vary also depending on if there are other agencies there. Like I said, in the situation where the police were there, it was very different than the situation when it was just me with the lady by herself. And I guess the point about that situation too is that in your training, you're given lots of kind of guidelines and the role you should play. But also I found that you'll use your judgment. Like that situation with that lady, she was all by herself, and the closure of a situation is sometimes not natural. Like, when is the time to leave? Well, even though I was there a good 2 hours or more with that lady, I couldn't leave her alone. She was waiting for her daughter, and her daughter was driving from Toronto. So that might have been not exactly what, you know, they tell you that you should do, but I knew, okay, you know what, I'm not leaving her. She needs someone to wait here with her for her daughter. And if it had been prolonged, I would have offered, okay, you know, can I drive you to the hotel? But your judgment will sometimes come into play. And if you're not sure, call your team lead, and they will always be there, and they will answer any question, and there is no bad question. And when you're on call, if you happen to run to Walmart, make sure you've got your bag in the car, because that did happen to me once. I was in Walmart and I got a call of my 2 calls, and so I did have my bag in the car. So then I had my volunteer badge, and yeah, so I think those are the notes that I kind of made. Any questions or anything else, Stella?
That was perfect. One thing I want to note when it was funny to see people's reaction when you said you've been on call a year and I've only received 2 calls. I would say our call volume is definitely down, and I would kind of play that up for COVID. There was a long time where police weren't necessarily aware whether we were providing on-scene support or not. Since we've which was the case the first lockdown, we were only providing phone support. Now with more information, education, PPE, all those things in place, we are, as long as volunteers are comfortable, sending volunteers out on scene. So now police are becoming more aware of that again, and our call volume is starting to then pick up. We normally go in and do briefings with each platoon, and just all the new recruits coming in, all new officers coming in, giving a briefing on who victim services is, what we do, what we can offer. And again, because of COVID, we can't get in there to do that. So there's a few kind of like not the norm circumstances that are affecting our call volume. So hopefully that can start to pick up in the coming months with the vaccines rolling out the way they are, and we can kind of get back into utilizing our volunteers more frequently. So the more you're on the schedule, the more likely you're going to get called. And we're probably going to call you for a call when you're not on the schedule than when you are. So that does happen if we have no one on call.
Me too,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
I
You're
treat that. So that makes
not
it
not that you're ever expected to go. Just if we had a call in Madoc and we only have like maybe 3 or 4 volunteers in Madoc, we start with our Madoc volunteers and say like, are you able to go? Absolutely. If you're at work, if you have no childcare, you can't, because maybe it's a Sunday and you've had half a bottle of wine and you can't drive anywhere, because that's happened to me before when they've called and wanted me to go somewhere. I'm like, yeah, not pregnant, but before pregnancy. And I haven't been able to go. So just be honest with whoever's calling you. It's no big deal if you're not on call, but we will reach out to you in those circumstances. So that's just a whole other aside. I will ask Lee if she has anything that I'm missing or I should add. Any questions from the volunteers? Like, this is very much a time to open up general discussion too. Because I forget like what you need to know. I'm going to blame pregnancy brain, that my brain is mush most of the time, and I forget to say kind of the most obvious things. I see a hand up.
Yeah.
Estelle, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, twice I heard get your bag ready. Okay.
What is a bag?
Well, I now I'm feeling bad because I didn't see that in the training thing. So
That's
what
for
should the
me.
bag be? Like my lunch, my water, pamphlet? What is a bag? Overnight bag?
So after after these 3 training sessions that I've organized, I'll be organizing another one where we will go through the paperwork that is involved with like following a call, what you need to fill out, expense claims, things like that. And you're also provided with a kit. So that's what is referred to as the bag that the volunteers have been referencing. And in this kit is going to be a victim services shirt, a reflective vest, a quilt, stuffed animals for children, coloring books, crayons, just kind of pamphlet information, kind of all those nooks and pieces that you may need on call, like on scene. So if you're going to the 401, there's been an accident and you've been dispatched there, that's when you're wearing your reflective vest. There's a parking pass inside. So if you're going to the hospital, you can put that up on your dash so you don't have to pay for parking at the hospital and they won't ticket you. Well, they're not supposed to ticket you. So that's what's in your bag. But we will have a whole other session that's organized at the end of this where we can go through the whole kit and I'll show you what you're receiving. So we try and equip you with as much information and pieces as possible so that you feel equipped going out on calls. Lots of our volunteers have added to the bag or taken things out or have come up with their own kind of tools and tricks of things that have been useful. I know one of our volunteers always brings water, like water bottles that they offer to whomever they're supporting, especially if they're going to like a detachment or a hospital. Again, COVID's going to maybe change that a little bit, but it's an icebreaker for getting people to kind of feel comfortable around you, offering offering water. Sorry, Kim, do you have something to say?
So I was gonna say, that was really helpful when you did go through the bags, because I remember getting it and thinking, and the other thing was the binder that's in the bag that has all of the agencies and the phone numbers. So today I was thinking, when all the presenters were talking and all these different numbers, that in your bags you do have all of those numbers, even though as soon as you call your team lead says, oh yeah, we're going to call here. So, but just in case you think, oh, I'm never going to remember where to look up these numbers or anything, it's all right there in that binder.
So we do try and equip you as best as possible. And then people, if they have Google on their phone, often use that as well. A lot of the volunteers on scene are very much providing that emotional support and practical assistance. And you'll be how do I want to put this? Basic needs like transportation or having access to a phone can be a huge barrier for the folks we're supporting on scene, especially when it comes to crime. And you just showing up with the ability to transport someone and a phone that they can use could be the service that you're providing, which seems crazy, but it's those pieces that can go a really long way of making that smooth transition, because without the transportation, without a phone, they can't get connected to, say, Interval House to see if there's a bed available, and they wouldn't have been able to get there. And without a phone, maybe they couldn't coordinate who was going to care for their dog if they left, or their horses if they left, or they don't have car seats, so they needed to coordinate rides for their kids to go somewhere. There's lots of circumstances where just problem solving those basic pieces is helping the process move forward in such a smoother capacity than it would have been if you weren't there. Any other questions, concerns, comments? Yes, Diane.
Hi, I just want to ask, does Kim have any tips for self-care or any ways to deal with the stress after a call? Are there any good tips that you have for that, Kim?
I think for me, I would say the gratitude, like literally that feeling that the victims often give you, and not like, I mean, it's nothing big, but that to me is something that kind of sustains my positive commitment. I think that's, that one lady, she called me an angel, and I was just like, okay, I think when I'm on call, I do have this, it's a different kind of feeling I have. It's not anxious. It's not like every time my phone rings, I'm like this, but it's just it's a constant thing on your mind. It is a constant thing on your mind. And especially, like, I tend to do a lot of night shifts. Like, I don't know why, but anyway, that's what Stella gives me, but that's fine. And if I do wake up in the night, I go, okay, that's 3 hours and there hasn't been a call. And before I go to bed, and I remember this was other volunteers saying, like, I have my outfit on the chair that I'm going to put on if the phone rings. I wouldn't say my experience has led me to feel, okay, I need to do something to counter the impact of the service that I am giving. I would say the service that I have given, as much as, I come away from it feeling sad for the situation, and I do think back to it sometimes, I don't know if reward's the right word, but the appreciation that the victims have felt was just, I guess, reinforcing to, this is that make, when that was reinforcing for me, that I feel, okay, this is valuable when, no matter how frequently I'm able to provide it with. And I think hearing about not having the opportunity to get together and build that network, everything that everybody is doing in the last year is definitely impacted and a different experience because of COVID. So I think when it's over and you can network and then have the opportunity to possibly get involved in other ways besides just the calls, I think I will appreciate that too. I don't know if that really answered your question, but
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. I was just wondering what your perspective was, and I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Welcome.
So if I could just pop in just for a sec. So
Yeah.
I'm Lee. I'm actually going to be talking with you tomorrow night. But I just wanted to, and perhaps you already know this, but after any call that you do go out, your team lead will always offer you the opportunity to debrief about the situation. I know there's been some times where, 15, 20 minutes, half an hour spent talking and just sort of processing what you have experienced, what you're feeling. And sometimes just that period of time can be so valuable, so that you're not taking what you have experienced and what you've been doing sort of on with you for the next day or two or week. Just to sort of process and know that, whatever you did, whether you feel you did a lot, whether you feel that maybe you didn't do much, just the difference that you have made just being there. I like the fact, yes, it's wonderful when victims can sort of show their appreciation and say thank you. And I've been here I've been volunteering now for almost 9 years. And a lot of times that I have found that doesn't necessarily happen. Just sort of in the chaos of the moment, what the victim is going through at the time, it's, that immediate sort of crisis, that sometimes you really sort of need to just remember, sort of tell yourself that you made a difference, because sometimes you don't get that feel. And a lot of times the victims they won't remember you. They won't remember necessarily what you have done, what you have said. But they will remember that there was someone that was there that sort of helped them through, sort of that, help them with that sort of immediate crisis. So.
Thank you, Lee, for mentioning about the debrief and the follow-up, because when I say your team leads are awesome, like their appreciation statements are abundant. Like even if you don't get a call, I particularly appreciate it when a team lead checks in with me to just say, okay, so you're on call, just because like sometimes when you don't get a call, I'm thinking, oh, did I have the date wrong? So I just think that's like, okay, that's, but they are thanks so much all the time. And that is very reinforcing too.
And also, sorry, also with debriefing, your team leads will offer that to you, but then you also have the opportunity to debrief with victim services staff the following day. So there is that whole sort of process in place for volunteers to sort of work through any sort of experience that they've had, and that sort of does help with self-care as well, being able to talk about your experience.
Mm-hmm. The board has recently implemented that. So JJ has taken on this responsibility of following up with anyone who's been on scene 72 hours after the call. So they're offered the debriefing piece by the team leads. Whether they accept it or not, they're still going to get a phone call from JJ 3 days later, just to, well, unless it's like a holiday weekend or something, that next business day, just to touch base and see like how you're doing. Like, and there's going to be, like, I've been on calls that probably you would think would bother me, that I don't like carry anything away with me. And then other calls that are bothersome and you just like, you're going to be impacted. It depends on your own mental state, whether you have kids or don't have kids. All of those pieces play into how you're feeling. And there's going to be calls where if you're not impacted, then that might be concerning as well. But just wanting to making sure that you're processing it and that you're feeling supported and not having any problems with that moving forward, because we definitely don't want to traumatize you by sending you out on these calls as a volunteer. That's obviously not our intentions. But I've been to suicide calls where the individual is still maybe present, or like I can see them, and you just have to be prepared for that. Or when you go to sudden deaths, like the deceased may still be in the home. They're going to have them covered up in all the circumstances I have been on. You won't be able to physically see them, but just that heads up that you'll be in a room with a dead person. But if you have that kind of knowledge going in, I feel like you're not shocked. Where I've attended scenes where I think I'm going to like a domestic and all of a sudden it's a sudden death and they provided me the wrong information and just kind of catches you off guard that not what you were expecting. And a lot of the volunteers have mentioned like just kind of getting yourself mentally prepared when you're driving to the call. And I used to try and like almost troubleshoot the call and figure out like what I'm going to say, how I'm going to do it, have everything kind of planned out before I even get there. And I don't recommend doing that because it will not go that way in the slightest. And you might have in your head that, oh, I'll be in and out of there in like 2 hours. And then 6 hours later, I'm coming home. Like it just sets myself up for failure. So those are some tips I would like to share with you of how to prepare. It's more just kind of thinking of resources, like what can I go in equipped with, and your team lead and staff are great for that. If like you're going into domestic and they need accommodations, like we can cover that. They need transportation, we can do that. Food and vouchers, and that's where the staff and team lead kind of in your back pocket are going to let you know what we can offer, and you're going to be the ones helping it kind of plan out while on scene. You're going to be the eyes and the ears there and providing that emotional support, and we'll be the one equipping you kind of with your tools and what to pull out. And then once you become equipped and knowledgeable and have a few calls under your belt, you're not going to need the team leads as much, or it's going to be more of a conversation. Like, she's going to need accommodation. She has 3 kids. Can you start seeing what shelters are available? And then you're kind of taking more of the lead while you're on scene. And that's where going out with seasoned volunteers with you on your first few calls is super helpful as well. Because even just arriving on scene, like who to talk to, who's the lead, who has dispatched you there. Sometimes us as team leads and staff, we get that information, like we know we're sending you to this address and that it's Constable Earl that's requesting you. But then sometimes we don't. Sometimes we get nothing from dispatch. We just know it's a domestic at this address and to send 2 volunteers. So we try and provide you with as much information as possible and get as much information as possible. But sometimes it's just not there because comm center doesn't know, or they're waiting to hear back. One thing I will stress a few times is the importance of getting your paperwork to me. So one thing I just want to make you aware of is when we get a call from dispatch that someone is needed on scene or requesting on scene support, we don't get names. Sometimes we do, but very seldomly do we get names and contact information for the person that you're supporting. We have the officer's contact information and address. So you are very much a vital person when you're on scene to collect that information, to get the numbers, to get their names, and then the importance of getting that back to team leads and staff. Because I've had to chase a few people when the victims are obviously needing follow-up support, or they're getting out of the hotel we put them up on the Monday at 11, and I don't know how to get in touch with them. I can problem solve and get a room number, but it's very helpful when that paperwork comes in a timely fashion so that I can reach out to them and help maybe extend their stay or figure out kind of what those next steps are. Because especially on a weekend or overnight, they haven't had any additional follow-up, and we want to put things in place for them so that they feel that it's kind of a warm transfer as opposed to just them starting all over again with no emergency supports around them. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Thanks, Jody. Any questions, concerns, thoughts?
I actually I'm terrified after listening to all of this. No, but really, like, I think my biggest fear going into this is being that victim services volunteer who just doesn't know when to frickin' leave. Like, I'm so scared that we'll get there and just like not know when to leave. And like, because I'm that person that I just want to stay and like help people forever, right? Like, how do you know when to frickin' leave, guys?
So my experience, and I can let the others speak to this too, is you're kind of filling the void between when the crisis has happened and when their natural support system is going to kick in. So like Kim's experience, she was waiting for the daughter to get from Toronto. So when that kind of natural support comes in, you know, it's time to kind of, you can do that warm transfer. They're now in proper or like natural supports and you can leave. But then there are some circumstances where they don't have any natural support system. They have no one coming.
That's what I'm
So
worried about right there.
I've
Yeah.
had like, especially with the senior population, they're happy for you to stay for dinner. They're going to cook for you. They'll make up a bed in the spare room and keep you overnight. If
That's
if
my
you want.
biggest fear, Stella. My biggest fear,
So-
because I will stay. And I'll be like,
No, you
Stella,
won't be allowed.
this is my new address now. I'm living here.
Yeah. I find like there are those client or those people you're going to support that are very welcoming, like almost want to host you, but that's not, so that's where you're just going to have to make sure you have your volunteer cap on and be like, no, like you have the right information. Somebody will be like, if it's a weekend and they have no natural support system, oftentimes our team leads or another volunteer can touch base with them by phone the next day, just if it's a Saturday, just to touch base, see how they're doing, and then before staff can necessarily follow up with them. So that would be a good segue, but you definitely don't want to become being dependent on you, right? So
Yeah.
keep that hat on, that you're not now just filling a new void for them, that they you're going to have your staff and team leads there too, right? Like if I'm texting you and
you're
saying,
gonna
are
be
you still there? You're like,
Jody, you
like,
need to leave now. Jody, leave.
Yeah. I'm
Okay,
coming
cool.
to pick you up.
Cool.
You need to
Wonderful.
leave. Like,
Thank you.
And
have
maybe
you
you need
left
to have
them?
your exit questions ready. Your exit questions, like when you can say, like, kind of, there's nothing else that you can really help with at that moment in time, right? If there isn't that natural, like the other situation I was in, the police had left. There was nothing else that really could be done to help them. So I think when that naturally evolves, now, as Stella said, there may be some, people who would probably maybe try and not find those things, but need a different thing. So then knowing that that's going to be kind of a weak area for you, knowing, okay, I need to know when I can say, okay, we've covered this, and knowing what you would ask and what is your exit plan ahead of time. I think knowing that you've got that little weakness will be good. That's the first step to trying to deal with it.
Thank you for that reassurance.
No, it is.
And then there's also calls where like it not that I always say it gets awkward, but it almost like there's just this natural break where they're ready to be by themselves, like that you've provided that like initial support. Maybe family's there, maybe not. You provided them with the numbers, and now it's like, okay, she's been here 3 hours, like it's dinner time. Am I feeding her? Like all of a sudden the roles almost shift, or they're just like they're ready for their own space. And you're gonna know when they're not, I don't want to say come to terms with it, but they've collected themselves enough that they can now kind of keep themselves safe for the evening, or think rationally, or ready to kind of move on to the next like step of grief. I mean, I'm using sudden death a lot because oftentimes that's when you don't necessarily know when to leave. Because with domestics and crime, there's more like statements and they have to go to hospital or they're going to interval, like there's more moving parts where you're coordinating things.
Right, that makes sense.
But you'll know.
Thank you.
And if not, Lee or myself or Rhonda or one of the team leads are going to tell you it's time to go.
They're just gonna come haul me out of there.
Yeah. Well,
you.
like I had a call one time in the county, and the caregiver of someone that required like full care 24/7 passed away. So police called us, assuming I was going to send a nurse that could stay with this woman that required full-time care for the weekend. And my volunteers like police have left, EMS have left, and they're expecting me to start doing like diaper changes and IV fluid change outs. And I'm just like, no, like pack your bags. Like
that's my biggest concern, because I would do
but
it.
then that's
Like,
where
I've
the
been in-
staff no
Yeah.
that's where this, and I mean the team lead's going to touch base with you again, right? And be like, what's going on, like
Thank
what's the
God for that,
update?
yeah.
And when they provided me with that, it was like, okay, I was calling back to the detachment, calling back paramedics, getting like social services or PSWs arranged for the next day so that that support could be provided, because that is not something we do. So
Thank
You will be in good hands, Jody.
Thank you. Thank you.
We will make sure, because again, it's the unknown. You don't know what you're attending to, and you want to, you're an empathetic person, you're a caring person, will want to help, but we will train you, and we will get you supported, and you'll have the right tools in your toolbox that you'll know.
Awesome.
promise
That
you
makes me feel so much better. Thank you.
Yeah, these calls aren't meant to terrify you. I don't want to scare anyone.
Well, I'm not going to lie to you, right? Like,
Yeah,
you need to
yeah,
know I'm a little
yeah,
terrified right now, but
yeah,
I trust you guys.
yeah. And again, it's always the unknown of, you don't know what you're gonna get yourself into, but we have very knowledgeable staff and team leads that have seen a lot and dealt with a lot and know what good questions to ask, and have the contacts and networking ability in the community that can help figure out any situation.
Awesome. Thank you.
What do you think, Lee? Have I missed anything?
I don't think so, Stella. It's an awful lot of information to take in.
Yes. And that's like I need you guys to prompt me and ask me questions, because when it is new information, obviously I don't want to overwhelm you, but for me, it's regurgitating daily stuff. So I could just keep talking and keep sharing stories and what I learned, but I feel like you're just going to be like, okay, whoa, pump the brakes. I'm still trying to figure out self-care and debriefing, and you're talking about something else, and now my brain's overflowing. But
now, the one nice thing, and I'm sure that you've probably already mentioned this for anybody, for all of the new volunteers, is that for the first time or couple times that you go out, you're always going to be going out with somebody who's a seasoned volunteer. So Jody, you were talking about, not knowing when to leave. You're going to be able to see a couple times before you actually have to make that decision. You're going to see people in action. And you sort of get a sense from seasoned volunteers as to, when they feel comfortable leaving. So you're going to have a few examples before you actually are in that position where you need to make the decision. So I hope that, that should maybe be a little bit reassuring that.
Yeah, it definitely is. Yeah.
Yeah. That you're not going to be going in, your very first call, you're going in on your own. You're going to be able to watch other people in action.
Yeah.
And a lot of times after that, then you will discuss with them, what you think went well, if there's anything that maybe any other suggestions you might have had, or, it's really a good sort of back and forth.
I'm sure it's just kind of like the normal anxiety that all of the volunteers feel like going into things, where you're concerned about what you're going to say and when to leave it, like all of those things. And I'm sure like once I go on a few calls with a seasoned volunteer and get a better feel for things, that'll be okay. But, listening to the experiences now, I'm like, there's no way that I could go into that like day one, right? Like, that's kind of where it hit for me. But then like, no, we go in with other volunteers to start, right?
And Jody, I say this to all the volunteers, you're not in crisis. It's not you haven't been impacted by the crime. You're not the one that's been, and this, I shouldn't just speak to Jody, this is to all volunteers, but going in with that mindset that you're not the one that just lost a loved one. So the folks that you're supporting are not on the same wavelength as you. You might be anxious, and like I've said really stupid shit on scene and like the wrong information.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. Thank you.
They don't remember. Like
Wonderful.
And that's where the staff following up the next day, they can be helpful. Like I'm not going to give examples of where I screwed up, but it has happened and it will happen. And as Lee had said, they're not necessarily going to remember you specifically. They're not going to know your name, your date of birth, and what you drive and where you live, but they'll know this really nice angel from Belleville came to her house and provided support while she waited for her daughter. And that it's more a feeling that you leave them with. But just keep in mind that the main thing I want you to take away is that you're not in crisis. You're there to just help them problem solve.
Absolutely.
And it's not complex things. It's remembering to put on a winter coat when it's -40 and you're going to a neighbor's house, or that you're going to stay with your sister for 3 days, that maybe you should feed the cat and lock the door. Those are the things that they're not paying attention to, or even like to turn the heat down or turn off the lights, or maybe like turn the oven off, or those pieces that you just not being impacted by the crime, you're going to recognize and take notice of and be able to help them get to that next step.
Yeah, and I think like that's what I've been hearing a lot from you and the volunteers. It's just basic things. I think just because of the online training and learning about, you know, all of the signs to look for and all of the, you know, it's overwhelming. So, you know, hearing you guys talk about it and those basic kind of principles definitely making me feel a lot better about things for sure.
Yeah. And I know the training can be intimidating or overwhelming because it's giving you the knowledge base of understanding sexual violence or understanding domestic violence. Like that whole scope is a lot of information. So it's just giving you that understanding of, take domestic violence for an example, like women leave 7 times before they actually leave. Where if that's the first time you've ever been exposed to domestic violence education, it's important for you to know that prior to going on scene, so you may not say something that's offensive, or you can just be more empathetic and understanding of the decisions that she has or has not made. I say she, but sometimes men as well. And then helping them problem solve. But you're not doing any counseling sessions or the control and power wheel and helping them understand domestic violence while on scene. That piece of information is to help you understand it, so you can provide that compassion and support to the individuals you're on scene with. Does that kind of make some clarity?
Yeah, absolutely.
That made sense.
Yeah, what I've been taking from the training and from, you know, listening to you guys is listen a lot and, you know, just be there. So, you know,
and
I am nervous, but
there's going to be circumstances where you can't fix anything and you feel like there's nothing you can do, but just even providing validation to the things that they're feeling is a huge step. I've had that conversation with Stacey Dowling, who's a psychotherapist locally, and like I've had that conversation with her with calls where you feel like you're not able to provide anything, and she's like, the biggest thing that you can do after traumatic circumstance or crisis is just that reassurance and validation that yes, what they're feeling is completely normal and that it's okay to feel that way, and what they've experienced is horrible, but they will get through it. Just someone saying those simple words will make a world of difference.
I've been practicing with my boyfriend and my dog.
You're going to be set. You're going to be so low.
All those validating statements. I got it on lockdown.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bella.
No problem. Well, I have 2 toddlers upstairs. I need to go to bed. So if there's no further questions, I am happy to wrap up this session for this evening. I appreciate everyone that's made time to jump on live tonight, and we have another one tomorrow, but either way, you will be hearing from me.
Thank you so much. This has been so helpful, and I appreciate everybody's honesty. It's so wonderful. It's refreshing to know, because, you know, it is a little scary sometimes, and it's great that we can talk about it. That's awesome.
Have a good night, guys.
You too.
Thank you.